Okay.
Reverend Katey Zeh, my girl, and that doesn't mean I'm girl means my home, and no, homie said as dating me. But anyway, I'm so glad to be and today we're talking about compassion is on the ballot. We're in this election season that has more juice and energy and conversation than we've had at least since 2008, but in some ways even more than the 2008 election season. And we're saying compassion is on the ballot because in this time of extreme polarization, there are those who want the US to look this way, and there are those who want the US to look a very different way. And I think compassion is one of the things that helps us understand what is really driving the kinds of polarization that we have going on. So let's talk first about what difference do you think it would make if voters' assessment of political candidates includes not only a focus on their political agenda, but also their track record and expressed principles guided by compassion. What difference do you think that would make?
Just in thinking about the question, I almost have to imagine another reality. It would seem so, it just feels like we're so far from that kind of a conversation. But when I imagine what that would look like, it seems like it would be a pretty radical shift away from thinking what's good for me personally, politically. What do I need? What's my situation? And I guess I'm speaking as someone who is around a lot of, middle class white folks. And I feel like that's the conversation is like, what's good for me? Are my taxes going to go up or down? And if the focus were on compassion, and we've talked about that before, it's about really understanding and taking action with those who have fundamentally different experiences of life. It would shift the focus to what's good for the collective, which I know then in turn is good for everybody, because it would be reconciling that, what we talked about, the hyper individualism, where we feel like we're disconnected from the well-being of other people. But in reality, we're all connected, and compassion understands that and centers that. So I think it would shift not just the content, but also the tone of how we discuss politics and what the debates would look like if compassion were a central value. I imagine that we might actually find candidates agreeing more with each other if compassion were at the center. Wouldn't that be interesting?
Wow. It is a different paradigm. And one of the examples you cited was about taxes. And that's often can be a litmus test as it relates to compassion. If I am only focused on me, myself, and I and my taxes, then often the kinds of things that are needed for the society to function well for the masses, there's not enough money in the coffers for society, and that focus on I don't want to pay more taxes, and we know that in some other societies, Sweden as example, that understands itself as a democratic socialist society, taxes are higher so that there is more available in the coffer. So say more about, you think more candidates would agree with one another, or there'd be more alignment if there were more focus on compassion? Can you say more about that?
Well, again, I think if the focus is on a collective good that's inclusive, there might be different strategies about how we get there, but in terms of the heart of the matter would really be about what you often say, what kind of society do we want to be? I imagine that those visions might hold some common ground, even if the strategies were different. There wouldn't be this, we actually need to be going in diametrically opposed directions, but actually there is sort of like a common focus. So I don't know. I mean, it's kind of radical to even think about it, but I think it would actually be more substantive, because it would be less on attacks and more about legitimate disagreement about how we get somewhere.
So excellent. I'm so glad you said that. So President George W. Bush talked about the importance of compassionate conservatism. And so that might be an argument of differences about how we get there. So he was understanding, at least at the beginning, some notions of compassion as a part of that. And the central theme is, how do we use conservative values to improve the general welfare of society? Now, so that's a slippery slope, because then who gets to determine what the general welfare of the society is? But why have we moved so far away, do you think, from this political principle? Because it's not discussed at all now.
No, I was actually thinking about this, and when I was getting involved in this work, I think it's related, but it was, I guess it was pre-Obama or maybe early Obama years when I started getting involved more politically. And I can remember doing a congressional briefing on the importance of comprehensive sexuality education. And the co-sponsor of that, because you always have to have a congressional sponsor, was a Republican. So there were Republicans at the time who understood, the importance of reproductive freedom, of educating all youth about their bodies and making smart decisions about them. And now that's unheard of, and part of that was a lot of those more moderate Republicans were either voted out of office by a moderate Democrat, or they lost to Tea Party candidates in the next round. So I feel like that rise of the Tea Party really shifted the Republican Party much more to the extremes. And I'm not a political scholar, so I was reading a little bit about this to see what some commentators were saying. And I looked up a piece that Amy Sullivan wrote, and I love her writing. And she said, in 2012, what happened to compassion? One answer is that it turned out to be expensive. Providing housing and food assistance, giving grants to charities that help low-income Americans, supporting job training programs, these all cost money. So the national debt increased a lot under George W. Bush, also because we were in the Iraq War. But that was part of the critique. And other articles have said, once there's another party in power, and you're talking back to the opposite party, that's often when the opposition party kind of moves to the extreme to show how different they are from one another. But one other thing I thought about, because George W. Bush talked about his faith a lot, and I feel like the rise of the Tea Party gave white evangelical Christians in particular this opportunity to say, I'm very conservative socially on issues like gay marriage and gun ownership and immigrants, while also giving them the opportunity to opt out of caring for the poor and marginalized. It gave them a place to go where they could be both, even though to me those are very contradictory as a person who follows the teachings of Jesus, but they had a place to go. And so I think it just went out of vogue with the rise of the Tea Party. But that is coming from someone who's not a political scholar.
What you highlight raises the issues of values clarification. And that's one of the things we do in the Compassionate Care Workshop, is really invite participants to look at if there are competing values, because most of us have 4 or 5 key things that are most important to us in our values. Some of those are competing. And so then if we're in a society, as you described it in the rise of the Tea Party, if there is a value for caring for the poor, but it costs money, and I have the value of paying as little tax as possible, because I want to, protect me, myself, and I, and I'm putting protect in quotes, in this very individualistic way. Then when I'm confronted with decisions about society, I have this values conflict, and so we see that moving in a very particular direction. So what are indicators of compassion you think would be helpful for voters to look for in candidates? How do we even recognize, if we're doing our own values clarification, right? And we say, this really isn't, I don't want to pay more taxes, but it's more important to me that we have systems that help serve the welfare of as many people as possible. If that's what I value more, what are some indicators for me to look for in candidates who would be aligned with that kind of value that I have?
Mm-hmm. I almost feel like a starting point even before then would be just really looking at how the federal budget is allocated right now and where money actually goes. Because I think there's just a lack of understanding about how much goes into defense versus some of the social programs that are often the ones talked about and demonized. So that was something that I learned when I was working in foreign assistance, was just how small a part of the federal budget that was and how much good a little bit of money can go when you're talking about global health. It's the same when you're talking about dollars that can be spent on programs that are helping low income folks and others. So I think just really understanding, like, what do we mean when we're raising taxes, and where is that money going? So in addition to that, once you can get past the piece about raising taxes a little, is I think looking at what kinds of legislation and programs has this candidate consistently supported, and there's lots and lots, and I'll miss some, but things like Medicaid expansion, support for undocumented students and families, programs that support survivors of gender-based violence, supporting public education. I mean, there's lots and lots and lots of programs you can see if they're consistently supporting. But I was also thinking about compassion is something that has to continue growing as we learn more information and as we learn about people who are different from us. So I think even, I don't know how this could be measured, but candidates who are open to learning and changing as they learn new information. And their positions aren't just rooted in an opposition to their opponent, but again, that question, what kind of society do we want to be, and really striving for that versus just winning for winning's sake against their opponent.
Yeah. And you said federal budgets, and I would add to that the state and local budgets and school budgets and all of those kinds of things.
Absolutely. The moral document of a budget is something that I've heard, I don't even know who coined that term, but it is true. Where we spend our money is what we value.
The moral document of our budgets. I love that. I really do. So most quizzes that are out there to help people discern which candidates are most aligned with their own politics and their own values often focus on policy issues. So what you've just outlined is, look at some policy issues, but what are they saying about the environment, and what are they saying about public education? And public education is such a biggie in so many ways, because you were talking about moral budget. Moral document of the budget. So many places we see more emphasis being given to tax breaks, tax credits, etc., for families that opt out of public education. What does that say to you about candidates that support that? And why are
that
we,
support kind of the voucher system.
yeah, why are we bankrupting our public educational systems? What does that have to do with compassion? Anything in
Yeah.
your?
I mean, again, I think it goes back to um, this false idea of hyper individualism and choice. You know, school choice is often how that's framed. And the emphasis is on being able to opt out of the collective. And that's usually for white parents, you know, who want to go join a charter school. I mean, I'm speaking as someone, again, not an education policy person, but my sense is that's often for more well-to-do parents, white parents in particular, who just feel like they want the best of the best for their kid, and they're you know, and that gets put over what would be the collective good. School choice has been a big topic in our county, and I'll just speak personally, if you don't mind. When we were thinking about kindergarten for our daughter who's in kindergarten right now, we were talking to other parents. There just seemed to be this, I'm going to go get the very best for my kid no matter what mentality. I'm going to do, you know, what's best for them, and I'm going to, you know, apply for magnet schools and try to get the very, very best. And our decision as a family was, our child doesn't need to absorb more resources than what she's allocated. She's going to be just fine. She has everything that she needs. And so we're going to just keep her out of that system of like the lottery, and just say, we're going to, you know, her local school is good. It's fine. It's fine for what she needs. And if it's not, we can supplement on our own because we're in that position. And I just feel like the mentality, it's acceptable among more elite families to say, I'm going to go get the very, very best for my kid. And it doesn't matter if I'm absorbing resources that would be better for other kids who don't have that support system at home or access to a tutor or whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? Like there's just this, I don't know, it's a hyper individualism thing. And it just seems like it's a perfectly acceptable and almost moral thing to put your children first in that way, regardless of what other kids need. And I think the school choice part is absolutely in alignment with that.
Yeah. And the hyper individualism, that value running counter to a value of seeing all children as your children.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's completely right.
So we've been seeing increasing numbers of Republicans, many who've been a surprise to many of us, who have been endorsing the Biden-Harris ticket.
Mm.
Is there any implication of this as it relates to compassion? Is it that they are seeing more compassion from the Biden-Harris ticket? Are they some of the Republicans who were aligned with George W. Bush's understanding of compassionate conservatism? What's your sense of that?
Yeah, that's so much at the heart of it. I feel like it's out of this real shared concern about the future of our country. I mean, there have just been some things that have really shaken like the very bedrock of some institutions that, at least to my knowledge, have not been challenged in the ways that they are right now. And so I think folks are saying these aren't the values of my party that I'm seeing in current leadership. And, you know, we have to be willing to admit when our leadership is not living into the values that we hold dear. And I think, again, that whole winning for winning's sake, I see people abandoning that and just really talking about some core values of dignity, decency, and compassion. I imagine there's a more complicated answer than that, but I do feel like it's almost this, we've been pushed too far and we're not going to put party over the future of this country. So I think there's some fear, and also this is a time for us to kind of heal some of the division, and
Mhm.
and no matter, a lot of healing is going to have to take place. And I think folks are seeing just how much harm has been done. So what do you think? What do you see?
I think that there's a recognition by those and others that democracy really cannot survive absent compassion.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
For democracy to work at its best, it has to entail a look at society that is not an oligarchy. That
Mm-hmm.
is not just a few making the decisions for the masses, but the masses have to participate in their own decision making. And that in order for that to happen, or as that happens, there is a principle of compassion that drives it. So the moral document of the budget is part of that. Where are we spending our resources? How are we bringing resources? And not only that, compassion, as I understand it, is not just about the current generation.
Mm-hmm.
Compassion is also about future generations, and how do we show up in this moment with the care and compassion for those who will come behind us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a really rich moment for all of us to think about democracy in ways we've not been pushed to think about it before. What do we need to do in order to sustain democracy, and especially democracy in the context of pluralism writ large, religious pluralism, racial pluralism, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what, for me, makes this US experiment unique in some tremendous ways. And without compassion, I believe it can't stand.
Right. And as you were talking, and as we've talked about before, that connection to reproductive freedom and how it is about not allowing the few to make major decisions for others for whom there is no level of understanding, where there is no participation of those voices, of those experiences. And as you were saying before, reproductive freedom is central to democracy. And I think that that's absolutely correct. Because we have to be free in our bodies for us to be free at all.
And it is the case, and we'll talk more about this at another time, but in Nazi Germany, the two attacks on reproductive freedom that Hitler made, one was outlawing abortion and the other was forced sterilization. And we have those same kinds of attacks on reproductive freedom happening here. That was a context that moved that country away from a democratic process. And we have the same kind of efforts here that move us away from democratic process. And we hope in conversations we have coming down the road to lift up those intersections, because they're really, really important. And
Yes.
thank you. Thank you so much. It is the case, not only is democracy on the ballot, as many people are saying these days, but compassion is also on the ballot this year. And how will we vote? Thanks, folks. Talk with you soon.
Thank you.